Hi, I'm Mark Boxer with OFS, and OFS's weblog series is called What's New in My World. So today I'd like to talk about rollable ribbon, and if you haven't seen it before, it is this stuff. So it's pretty neat. It collapses upon itself, when it's rolled into a tight cylinder, so I can kind of collapse it. It's kind of hard to see that. Uh, and then you can also easily separate it out to pull out an individual fiber. So I'll do that and get a little bit closer so you can see that, and then it just snaps back into place so you can splice it again. So it splices like a ribbon. It can be rolled very, very tightly, making it just a way to get very, very tight density in a very, very small package. So you compare this to a flat ribbon, and so this is a flat ribbon. And so there's no moving of this or no rolling this without breaking the ribbon. So why this is important really comes back to geometry. So this is an 864 fiber central tube flat ribbon cable. So if you look at it, you can see that there is a lot of space in between the flat ribbons and the tube, and that's because we've got ribbons that are fundamentally rectangles, and the cable is fundamentally a circle. And so when you have a circle and a rectangle, then those don't fit that efficiently. So if you look at a rollable version of this cable with 864 fibers, you can see there's not very much space between the fibers and the tube. And let me go ahead and put both of these side by side, and you can see that this is the flat ribbon 864, this is the rollable 864. Yeah, there's a significant difference in size between the two. So, rollable ribbon was dreamed up in Japan back in the 2000s and went through a development path that was actually similar to the SC connector that happened in the early 1990s. And what I mean by that is that NTT in Japan farmed out the concept to various companies who ultimately brought it to market. And so, for the case of rollable ribbon, OFS's parent company, Furukawa, was one of those companies that introduced rollable ribbon, and so we brought it to market during the middle part of the 2010s. So there's so many benefits to rollable ribbon. We see it in a lot of different environments, and I call this the buffet of benefits using rollable ribbon. So it's small. So the ribbons themselves are very small. They can be rolled, and so that means that cables can be much smaller and lighter for a given size. That can mean, excuse me, smaller ducts, more fiber in a duct. Can mean smaller handholds, more cable on a reel for longer lengths or fewer splice points. And then for aerial installations, also since everything's smaller, also less weight on the pole, less amount of ice to build up. And so just overall, just smaller in general, and that typically makes things easier. Some customers like it because it can be placed in thinner splice trays, enabling more trays in a closure or smaller closures for a given fiber count. And if you look, all of these cables are gel free, so they're easier to prepare for splicing. And of course, these are ribbons, so they're, can be mass fused and spliced 12 at a time. So the initial installations were primarily used to connect data centers together because data centers use very high fiber count cables. Think of 1728s, 3456s, and those kinds of things. But what I'm really excited about is the concept of using rollable ribbons in lower fiber count networks, including fiber to the home backbone and distribution networks. And so for those applications, we have typically used loose tube cables in the past because it's easier to pull out an individual fiber to connect a subscriber. No, but now with rollable ribbon, it's easier to pick out an individual fiber versus loose tube. The ribbons are clearly marked. The fiber color is always going to be in the same place. So you just basically pick out whatever you need. So now the cables can be smaller. They can be easier to work with in the field. And if you compare these, so these are all, what I'm going to show in just a second, are 288 fiber count cables. So this is a loose tube. So it's actually pretty big. I'll bring it a little bit closer so you can take a look at that. And then I'll hold that up. And this is a flat ribbon cable, 288. And you can see that it's roughly the same size as the loose tube cable. So now look at the rollable. And so I've got a couple of different versions of this, but actually the larger rollable, you can see that even the larger rollable is much smaller than either the loose tube or the flat. And all of these cables are GR20 rated, so you have the same rugged crush, impact, tensile performance that we've come to rely on for decades. So give it some thought for your network. Now you can get the benefits of ribbon splicing, when you can use it, or also single fiber access. So you can do either one, whenever you need either. So it can act as a ribbon. You can also act as a single fiber, and you can basically gives you a lot of freedom to use either platform in a much smaller package. So overall, we think we're going to see a lot more customers move towards rollable ribbon, in their fiber to the home distribution networks. And now in the future, it'll take a while, but that's what's new in my world today.